Thank you again for joining me on the Sutherland Report. One of the incredible privileges I have of doing this is the people that I know and the people I meet and the discussion that we can then have. And I now have the privilege to introduce to you again Karen Harradine, who is an incredible journalist, commentator, who regularly is big contributor to the Conservative Woman, an amazing effort that they are due to push against all the tyranny. Karen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me back onto your show, Mark.
Not at all. Not at all. It's an utter delight to see you. And as I say to you off camera, and I'll say to you now, your voice is extremely important. What you write and you've written for a number of years is extremely important because of your insight. And like all of us, we have life experience that we bring, and we look back and we think, wow, I can draw on that and that and that. So thank you. Karen, let's get into this. I do want to get onto your piece where you have commented on the Epoch timepiece about UNRWA, etc. And when we mention UNRWA, we have a wonderful new definition, which was posted by a note on a particular clip.
Oh God, that was brilliant.
That was brilliant. We call it the United Nations Rocket Warehousing Agency. That is what our definition
probably sums it all up.
That sums it all up. Karen, what are your reflections on the fact that South Africa has decided to take Israel to the international court, which has been unfolding over the last few days and is now unfolding? What are your feelings about that?
There's several things with regard to this. One, the ANC has a long history of cozying up to anti-Semitic organizations like the PLO and Islamists and the IRA as well. You know, when Mandela was inaugurated, Gaddafi was invited to the inauguration, so was Yasser Arafat and the PLO. You know, there's a long history there. That's the first thing. The second thing is that don't forget that South Africa is up to its eyeballs in debt to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, China's economic colonialism, China and Iran signed a 25-year agreement in 2021. Part of the BRI, China buys oil from Iran cheaply and invests in Iran's infrastructure, which is part of the BRI. So we have this new growing alliance between China and Iran. Both are very influential in what goes on in South Africa. We also have Iran has become one of the newest members of the BRICS alliance. So it's turned the BRICS alliance, instead of being a diplomatic, economic agreement between the BRICS countries, is now becoming something that becomes an anti-West mechanism and an anti-Israel mechanism for China and Iran and Russia to perpetuate. South Africa, as I've written over and over again, has beset with problems. The government there can't keep because of conspicuous consumption and corruption, they can't keep the lights on. There's problems with water shortages. Some people don't have, cities are often without access to water. Unemployment is at an all-time high. The country is a failed state. I mean, Britain shows aspects of failed state, but South Africa is a completely failed state. There is a threat from the Economic Freedom Fighter Party, I can't remember the exact name, the EFF, where they are now seen as they're a Marxist political party. Now seen as a threat to the ANC, also riddled with anti-Semitism, as all Marxist parties would be. So the ANC has done this as they're a puppet really of Iran and China. They are, and I've given the reasons why, they are trying to deflect from the failed state that they have driven South Africa into. They are also trying to garner voters' attention and votes in South Africa, because many people there are very upset with the ANC for their corruption and conspicuous consumption. And this is a way for them to see curry favor, basically, with the voters. A lot of people in South Africa are pretty much, have been brought up on anti-Semitism, anti-Israel stuff. So, and then there's also, the global movement to what I call the Nazification of the world. There are all these elements that play together. And South Africa is trying to push itself to be a big player on the world stage now. And given the Nazification of our entire world and the growing anti-Semitism, particularly amongst the Western governments as well, and the West, it's all these strands have connected, and this is why South Africa has done it. It's mainly a puppet of Iran and China now.
It's brilliant. I mean, wonderfully summarized, because in many ways it's throwing back Gutierrez, whatever his name is, the guy who's head of head of the UN, who then would not criticize, so slow to criticize Hamas and what had happened to Israel, and then says, "Oh, you've got to put it in a context." Well, you wonderfully have just put what South Africa are doing in a context, and that context is not explained at all. And the other thing is that you also, because of your life experience, you have a right to actually say that, because you've experienced it. And this is the key thing, isn't it? It's people actually drilling down and understanding. Do you, and I know we were talking about this off camera, you were saying that really people have no idea of the influence of China, the effects of policy in regard to Iran. What say you?
I mean, China has played the long game. In a way, you have to admire them. I mean, they've conquered the West without firing a single shot. The BRI is completely pernicious. They are brutal colonialists in Africa. They have long been threatening the security of countries in the South China Sea, something I've written about as well, particularly Taiwan. And we know what they do with Hong Kong. I think very much that, as I've always pointed out, the lockdown propaganda from China collapsed Western society and our economic society. We know this is part of Agenda 2030. If you look at it in the context that the UN is dominated by an Islamist bloc, by China. Iran is very influential. Iran is now the 9th biggest donor to the World Health Organization. I mean, these should terrify people, particularly since we know that we're on the march to Agenda 2030 run by the UN and its subsidiaries like the World Health Organization. So China really plays China's interests and wants to dominate the world, and has seen where the writing is. And the West is so weak. We're governed by treacherous, weak, dim-witted lunatics, is the only way I can describe them. Israel is the scapegoat, and we'll come to that. China and Iran are new best friends, and there are new superpowers. So all of this is extremely concerning. Every time a person buys a COVID test or mask, this is what made me so angry when these were made mandatory. They are enriching the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party, who, I mean, this is what it's extraordinary to me. They imprison Muslims in concentration camps. They persecute all the Abrahamic religions in China. I've written on all of this. They are new best friends with Iran, who is one of the most evil regimes in our world today, and a huge threat to the safety and security of all of us. I mean, it's extraordinary watching this, and people they either don't care, or they like to go down propaganda rabbit holes or anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. They are either oblivious, or they want to blame everything on the Jews. I mean, it's unbelievable. And when you do that, when people blame, the Jews, Israel, Zionists, whatever words they want to use, what they're doing is they let in the real culprits of scot-free. Iran, China, etc. There are terrible things happening in our world, like the persecution of Christians in Africa, which is something I've written on for a long time. People see people, you know, I've seen anti-Semites on Twitter go, oh, it's Mossad that's persecuting Christians in Africa. I'm like, do you really think Mossad has got time? Hello, this is kind of like, this is backed by Islamist groups that's been going on for years. The evidence points to the most hideous organizations, Islamist organizations, Islamic fundamentalist groups persecuting Christians. I have written on this over and over again. All the evidence is there, and it's disregarded for the most ridiculous, nonsensical, anti-Semitic garbage I have ever read in my life.
We're talking about aid here, I think this would be, let's just go in a slightly different direction here. So we've suddenly seen David Cameron come back as Foreign Secretary, which is another program, a massive program in itself. My own understanding, a man that then gave "Let's go and bomb Libya," and I think his dear love.
Yeah, you know, he's called Gaza a prison camp. You know, kowtowing to anti-Semites, and he really did everything he could to jeopardize Brexit. I mean, he's appalling. Anyway, carry on.
No, but this is what's really interesting. I believe when he then became prime minister, between him and then George Osborne, or before that, they're then pushing through the fact that Western countries need to give 0.7% of their GDP.
Yeah, that's a foreign aid. And that's a UN dictate. That comes from the UN. I mean, it's just extraordinary that we have such treacherous.
But let's explore that, because in regard to what's happening with UNRWA, which is with your press on the Epoch Times article, is that this money, we'll follow all this money goes to UNRWA, but if they are then receiving other money to fund schools separately, or fund this separately, or where, you know, a percentage of the GDP of 0.7% from a certain country, then that allows them to use that money to buy arms, etc., and to build tunnels. Right.
Exactly. This is the point that I've been trying to raise with foreign aid. What foreign aid? Sorry, I interrupt you.
No, not at all. Because I think the point we're trying to make is, where is the abuse of the foreign aid, and that if the UN then puts in a structure of 0.7% all those years ago, we now see the planning over many years, and now we see the outward working of that, because it means, well, if we're getting all this aid in, it means that we don't actually have to think about how we're going to spend our money, build a country properly, or build a state, or build an environment where we're actually going to put the people first that actually live there.
Britain is one of the countries that has taken on that UN dictate as legislation, really, and billions has been spent in the name of foreign aid. I've documented this since 2016. It's such a ruse. It's money laundering. It is for wealthy NGOs and civil servants to go on their jollies and, you know, in exotic places and virtue signal of how great they are, you know, using British taxpayers' money to fund despots, because basically the money does not go to the people who need it. This is the whole thing with the black hole of foreign aid. Why do we keep having to give? Surely if foreign aid worked and was given to the people that needed it, then there would be no need for it. I'm very much about, you know, the Britain having a emergency fund, so to speak, to help those who are caught in like a famine or natural disaster, etc. But there's sending of billions every year, not just to the United Nations, but literally lying in the pockets of despots, because that's where foreign aid goes, as well as you know, financing Hamas, etc. You know, look, we'll come to pay for slay in a second. But what happens, as you've rightly pointed out, and I have tried to point this out in my writings, that Western foreign aid allows these despots and dictators and brutal regimes that take the money from Western taxpayers in the name of foreign aid, it allows them to not spend any money on their own people with schools or health or anything like that, or infrastructure, because the West will do it for them via foreign aid. So that allows these despots to grow wealthier and wealthier, increasing their regime grip on the countries that these poor souls are unfortunately live under, as well as the fact that they are now free, like Hamas, to spend it on missiles, firing it at the Jewish state. And Hamas is coming for people in the West, make no mistake about that. And it's all, not all of it, because we know that not all of it is financed by the West and foreign aid, but a huge percentage of it has been. It is the most extraordinary thing. We have paid for our own demise.
I couldn't have said it better. Can you talk about, I mean, let's talk about the fact that we've got this situation in Gaza. We've got tunnels. We've got armaments. Okay, that's where a load of this money is going. I'm not sure how many kilometers of tunnels they have built, but I think it's suddenly becoming their own subway equivalent of the subway system.
There are myriad of tunnels there. Myriad.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's how many kilometers, but we are talking about a heck of a lot of kilometers. Could we then talk about the separation of suddenly the leaders of Hamas in Qatar and how their lifestyle is funded?
Well, this is the thing, Mark. People just are so oblivious to this. It's never mentioned in the mainstream media. As I have pointed out, as you pointed out, as the Epoch Times article pointed out, and other writers on the situation have pointed out, the Hamas leadership live a luxurious billionaire lifestyle in Qatar, in Malaysia, and I'm sure in London now.
Right.
While their people are languishing in Gaza, are kept in the most awful circumstances there, as pawns in Hamas's game against Israel. And so people need to realize they need to question, why is the Hamas leadership worth billions? Where does that money come from? Why haven't they invested it into Gaza? Why have they turned Gaza literally into a military base where they all, they've not, the Hamas regime, because it's not a government, has not invested anything into the infrastructure in Gaza. Not anything. The fancy villas and homes you see there are those who are loyal to the Hamas regime and who work for UNRWA as well. Everyone else is, caught in terrible poverty. The unemployment there is rife. The corruption is horrific. Where does all the money go? Billions have been sent to Gaza and the West Bank, to the Palestinian Authority and to Hamas. Where's all the money going? Because it's not going to the people of Gaza. It's not going to the people of the West Bank. It is going into the pockets of the Hamas leadership, of the Palestinian Authority leadership. And we know there is this heinous scheme called pay for slay, where the Palestinian Authority and Hamas leadership will give a monthly salary to those terrorists who have tried to murder Israelis or commit a terrorist act in Israel, now in prison in Israeli jails, and their families are given a monthly salary from the Palestinian Authority and from Hamas, meaning that these terrorists and their families have been paid to slay. And it's not just Jews who are victims, Christians and Muslims in Israel as well, victims of their terrorism. And where do they get the money from? Iran, financed by billions from Biden and Obama. Hezbollah, who's an Iranian proxy with their drug trade in South America. Western foreign aid in its many guises, including the Iran deal and United Nations and its subsidiaries that the West pays billions to every year, and little foreign aid. Like, the money is siphoned off by Hamas to pay for their missiles, to fund their leadership in nice villas in parts of Gaza, and for the billionaire lifestyle of the various Hamas leaders in Malaysia and Qatar. And people are like, oh, Israel's so bad. It's just extraordinary to watch.
Well, let's just have a quick reminder of geography, and please help me out. If we look at North Africa, all the way across North Africa, go through Morocco, go through Libya, then we get, of course, Tunisia, then to left, and then we go through Egypt. I've named all the, Sudan, Ethiopia. There's all these Muslim countries, and then we're going up, and of course, then Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Israel is this little country, the size, the equivalent of New Jersey in America, the size of the equivalent Parliament of Wales within the UK. That's it. And just to remind everybody that when people are singing from the river to the sea, it means we want genocide and to wipe out.
Exactly, Mark.
And I want to reflect on this with you. How have we reached a point where the despicable acts of October the 7th, and I have seen 1 minute 40 seconds of the footage that the Israeli government have then got out to various embassies to show people what's going on, and then to get journalists in. And you and I have witnessed journalist comments afterwards, for argument's sake, like the incredible Douglas Murray, etc. I was invited to. There was an opportunity to go down and watch some of that. I haven't done that. But what the point I'm making, how have we reached a point where people were denying, going, oh, I want more proof. Oh, this didn't happen. How have we reached a point in the journalistic discourse, say on the other side, where they are refusing to face facts? And I don't want to go into the description of some of those acts because they're appalling. But I will say this: when we are seeing bodies in the back of trucks, Hyundais or whatever, driven through into Gaza and everyone's celebrating, etc., let's not forget that citizens also followed Hamas, crossed over, took hostages, and there was this comment about them selling those hostages back to Hamas. How have we reached this point of utter denial? Because it sounds like an awful thing that's happened in the past. Sorry, I'll stop. In regard to Holocaust denial, this is, how come we've reached this point? What are your thoughts?
Anti-Semitism, as the late Rabbi Sachs said, is a virus. And if it's not tackled, it does proliferate and grow and expand. Anti-Zionism is the latest version, our century's version and last century's version from the 1960s onwards of anti-Semitism. People are proud now to be anti-Semites. It's a perfect storm. We look at the far right and their fascism. I see it all the time, but the far right is responsible for anti-Semitism as well. Jews taking over the world, etc., whatever it is. Then we look at the left and their unholy loving with Islamism. We look at who dominates our institutions, a combination in the West, a combination of the left, woke tyrants who are besotted with Islamism, etc., and the domination of the left and their unholy alliance with Islamism, dominating our schools, our universities, our mainstream media, and the alternative media now from the right and the left. They should be ashamed of themselves. We look at the growth of the UN and its powers accelerated in March 2020, particularly with Agenda 2030. We look at the increasing censorship in the West, where you're not allowed to say or do anything that goes against woke tyranny. Part of woke tyranny is anti-Semitism. As I've written before, I wrote several years ago that to charge anti-Semitism means that you are a racist. So it becomes, everybody's terrified of being called a racist or speaking out against the prevailing orthodoxy of the day, which is a horrible hybrid of fascism and socialism, and that we are experiencing at the moment. And so it's the ability for the UN has a grip on the rest of the world, as we've discussed, as well as the mainstream media and its propaganda. The mainstream media has long been anti-Israel in this country. I remember when I came here towards the end of the 1990s, I had grown up in a country that was, under apartheid South Africa, that was full of propaganda in the media. I had more freedom of speech going to university under apartheid than people have at universities now in the West. I was shocked by the mainstream media in this country with this horrendous anti-Israel bias that's been going on for decades. So it's a perfect storm. It's been tolerated. It's been proliferated. The whole inflammation of anti-Semitism under Corbyn's Labour. That didn't help. That was absolutely horrific. But what has happened now, what I'm seeing now, is some people not even bothering to cloak themselves in the so-called fig leaf of anti-Zionism.
Right.
They are out and proud anti-Semites. You know, I saw that video several months ago, one of the pro-Hamas marches with that idiotic, dim-witted girl screaming, "Kill the Jews." She was recorded. Was she ever arrested? Was she ever criticized? It is open season on Jews, and people are proud of it. They are proud of their anti-Semitism. Before this happened, even under Corbyn's Labour leadership, there was a certain sense of shame that some people had about hating Jews. Now they are proud of it. So it's been a perfect storm, all coming together. I blame our civil servants. I blame our politicians as well for capitulating. I mean, David Cameron, absolutely one of the worst. And for the kind of propaganda, you know, the more money you have, the more propaganda you can get out. And Iran is awash in money. Our mainstream media is financed, for example, like Qatar Airlines that finances Sky News. I mean, this is, you've got to go with the money. I mean, it makes me laugh when people go, "Oh, Jews control the media." If you really did control the media, do you really think we'd be reading the most absolutely abhorrent anti-Israel horrific stuff, not just in the mainstream media, but the alternative media as well, and blood libels and tropes and lies? I mean, it's been a long time coming. It's a perfect storm, and anti-Semitism is now trendy.
Wow. Could you give me a definition? Sorry if it sounds like a stupid question, no, but could you give me a definition of a blood libel?
Of course. I mean, basically, it is accusing Jews of killing others for pleasure. It's got its roots in the medieval blood libels that we saw, where Jews were accused of killing children. Happened in Norwich. It happened in Britain. That gave rise in the medieval era to the term blood libel. But Jews were accused of killing non-Jewish children to make blood for matzah, unleavened bread, for Passover. That's the root of the blood libel. And it's been proliferated and transformed into various guises over the years. I mean, in the Middle East, there have been various blood libels that have led to the slaughter of Jews. I've documented this not only in my own writings, but in my writings with Prof. Norman Fenton, where the origins of the blood libel come in. We see it with the mainstream media all the time. We see it with conspiracy theories, all anti-Semitic conspiracy theories all the time, that Jews are killing non-Jewish children. All, you know, these are blood libels. I mean, the very fact that the mainstream media, the freedom movement, the sorted anti-Semites like to proliferate the idea that Israel is killing Palestinian children just because they want to, just because Hamas says that's happening, is a blood libel. We know that over and over again, what Hamas claims that happens in Gaza when there's a war between Israel and Gaza, they are disproved over and over again. They always inflame the death count. They always, most people there, most of the people that are killed by Israel in Gaza are Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. Don't forget, ISIS operates in Hamas in Gaza as well. Hamas is forever inflating the figures, always blaming Israel for all this. And that is what a blood libel is, where Jews are blamed for killing others, particularly children, as a bloodthirsty sport. Basically, Jews are accused of drinking the blood of others, of non-Jews. And that is what a blood libel is.
And then, of course, you know, we can then look at the Spanish Inquisition and everything else. And
it is rooted in evil, and I see it proliferated all the time in the alternative media, mainstream media, in the freedom movement, on Twitter and social media. This is rooted in deep, deep evil, responsible for the death of millions, and it is horrific, horrific.
Because we're discussing history, and it's really important that we go through history and we have an understanding of history. And both you and I, with your, you know, your background in anthropology, we're looking back at this and studying people group, why have they made certain decisions and all the rest. And that is so important, profoundly important to this situation, because when people are throwing that Zionism, well, hold on a minute, let's just break this down. That's a movement that is saying for the right for a nation state of Israel to exist.
Exactly. I mean, Zionism is really the self-determination of the
Yes.
Jewish people.
Yes.
I mean, I get really irritated with the stupidity of people who go, oh, well, that didn't give you the right to kind of take over a country. I'm like, oh, where's your history? Where's your knowledge? Do you not know that Jews have had a continuous presence in Israel for 3,000 years? That basically it was conquered by Islamic armies, and Turkey also ruled it for a while. We were a conquered people for so long. All we did was get our land back from those who conquered us, and no one was kicked out. This is what the Epoch Times article points out. I pointed out in my writings. Many writers have pointed this out. That at the establishment in 1948 of the State of Israel, the Israeli government begged Arabs there, because there was no concept of Palestinian then. Israel was known as Palestine until 1948. Palestinians then were the Jews who lived in Israel. In 1948, they begged the Arabs living there not to leave, to stay and build the country together, because mainly Israel then was swampland. And what had happened is that in 1948, a lot of the Arab countries surrounding Israel that started the war in 1948 told the Arabs to leave Israel. Once we've conquered the Jews, you can go back. But we know that Israel won the war in 1948. We also know that at the same time, well, we know, and what is often, which I tried to point out in my article in TCW, and I've written about this before, is that almost 1 million what we call Mizrahi Jews were kicked out, expelled, forced to leave Arab and North African lands around about the establishment of the State of Israel. Almost 1 million refugees had nowhere else to go except to the new State of Israel. They were literally persecuted and expelled by these Arab countries from 1948 onwards. Where was the UN Refugee Agency for them? Which is what I ask in my piece. It is just quite extraordinary to see how oblivious people are to the history of the foundation of Israel, how tiny Israel is, how half the world's Jews live there, the other half of us are in the diaspora. There are only 50 million of us. Hitler did a very good job exterminating most of us. Basically, is that what people want? Do they really want the rest of us, the last 15 million Jews left on this planet, to be exterminated, to satisfy their bloodlust, to persecute Jews and to kill us? Because that is what it comes down to, and it makes me extremely angry.
Well, it's not surprising it makes you extremely angry, and quite rightly, because when we've reached a situation where people turn around and go, well, if we just get rid of Israel, then all the problems will be solved. This is what they are saying. This is what they are saying. This is what
opposite will happen, Mark. Because once the Islamists are finished with Israel and us Jews, they will come for Christians, they will come for Hindus, they will come for everyone else, including Muslims who don't buy into the whole Islamic fundamentalism.
Absolutely.
They will come from every single one of the others. And what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And don't forget as well that Israel is in the front line against Islamic terrorism, Islamist terrorism, against Islamic fundamentalism. That it does share its intelligence with Western countries, etc. Because if Israel falls in the Middle East, basically Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. If that should fall, then Israel would be turned into a bigger Gaza, basically, where it would just be a launch pad for Iran's war against the West. And I have no doubt that if Israel falls, the rest of us Jews in the diaspora will fall as well, God forbid, but we will be in jeopardy more than it. Because then there's no allied forces coming to save us this time, because most of what would have saved us were those who actually were loyal to their own country, loyal to the West, could see what Hitler was doing. This is the new Nazis, the Nazification of the world, the new Nazification. No one will save us. Very few will come to our rescue, as we have seen with the millions that are marching against Israel, marching in the name of Hamas and Iran and Islamist terrorism that we see every weekend. They will not save us. So when we are gone, there'll be nothing, there'll be no barrier, there'll be no buffer between the West and Islamism and Islamic fundamentalism and Iran and China's takeover of the world. There'll be no buffer. That is the one thing that Israel does for the West, is create that buffer. And then we're gone. And then the rest of the world will be even in more jeopardy and run really by the UN and its horrific forces and horrific influences like Iran and China. That is the scenario that comes should Israel fall.
Karen, what is Agenda 2030?
So basically, it's the most despicable thing. Basically, it is another way of war on the West, because most of us living in the West have seen the impact of sky-high energy prices, this whole green agenda, and most of our taxes on energy finances the green agenda. So finances green technology. China, which is one of the countries that pushes the green agenda, has a lot of investments in green technology, etc. So it's not surprising that it's been pushed by the UN. Agenda 2030 are the UN so-called sustainable goals.
Yes.
And really what it technically means, and they usually blame climate change as the reason why they need the sustainable goals. What it really means is the West is paying for its own demise. The West funds Agenda 2030. It is sending money to countries that are deemed at risk of climate change. So billions, again, are going out of Western taxpayers' pocket, out of Western countries, financing these despotic regimes in the name of Agenda 21. It is also the kind of, this is one of the things that I've said in my pieces on Agenda 21 on climate change. New technology is fantastic. Green technology is fantastic. The less reliance on oil we have, the better. But the problem comes in is that only the minority will benefit from green technology, as we're seeing. We have a look at our reliance on renewable energy. First of all, we know that it's extraordinarily expensive. Second of all, in order to create new renewable energy technology, the government taxes us to death with regard to that. The new renewable technology is part of Agenda 2030. It is really a power grab by the UN and its despotic regimes that run it to cripple the West further in the name of climate change, to cripple it economically, to create a global world order of socialism, fascism run by the West. I mean, for example, the pandemic treaty from the World Health Organization is part of that. It's really war on the West, sucking the Western taxpayer dry, while the despotic regimes that run the UN enrich themselves, including China with their green technology investments, enrich themselves at the behest of the West, at the sacrifice of the Western taxpayer in the name of climate change. I hope that sort of sums it up.
No, it's brilliant, because in many ways, again, there are so many people that are ignorant of this issue. It's a bit like the fact, and on another occasion, we need a deep dive on this one, because, and I've been trying to find certain correspondence I've had in the past with members of parliament. But when Theresa May was Prime Minister, we then signed the Global Migration Compact.
Oh, another UN thing.
Precisely. And then people are saying, the various people in government are saying, oh, no, it's got, it's fine, it won't affect us or whatever, we've still got control. No, I don't think we have. We only have to look at the channel. And that again needs to be revealed. You're absolutely right. As you say, this is another UN thing. You point out in your press of the Epoch Times article, which is brilliant. I've just asked people to go and look at that came out yesterday. How much money does the UK give to UNRWA?
Billions every year and more. I mean, this is the whole thing. We're financing our own demise. The money that goes to UNRWA finds its way into the pockets of Hamas, finds its way into the pockets of Iran. It is all documented. I've been documenting this for years. Other writers and journalists have been doing the same thing. The evidence is there. I mean, somebody like James Cleverly, like, he is rightly saying, oh, we must not demonize Israel. But then again, he's visiting Israel saying, oh, we've got to send money to Gaza. I mean, our entire political class is really run by people who have no idea what they're doing. One moment they can say, oh no, this is terrible what happened in Israel. And then the next moment they're busy sending money to Hamas or pay for slaves. And they can deny it for decades, but the evidence is there. How do they think the Hamas leadership got so wealthy? How do they think Hamas can afford its armaments? And it's not just Hamas, it's Hezbollah raging a war on Israel's northern border as we speak. This is, and it's another Iranian proxy, which has ruined Lebanon. You only have to look at what happens if Iran and its proxies get its hands on countries in the Middle East. Hezbollah has wrecked Lebanon. We see it. This is what would happen to Israel. It would be an absolute disaster, not only for us Jews, but also for other religions in Israel that seek sanctuary there, if it's ought to be for. But yeah, it's really the UN is the root of all evil in our world today, and and all its subsidiaries. And if people don't realize that, from what happened from March 2020 onwards, I don't know what will make them realize that.
Well, unfortunately, as a dear friend of mine says, constantly, they will do something when it's in their face, but that's a little bit too late. And
it's too late. No, we're too late. We're led by treacherous, weak dimwits in the West, and it really concerns me.
As time is approaching, we've still got quite a few more minutes. The pivot, the alliance between the left and Islamism. Would we say that really started where suddenly, under Yasser Arafat and having his KGB training and suddenly going
100%.
Right, and suddenly going, how can I use victimology to push forward my ideology? What are your thoughts?
Well, and then I'm so glad you brought that up, because few people realize this, that in the 1960s, the KGB collaborated with Yasser Arafat to create the Palestinian Liberation Organization, to create what we call Palestinianism.
Yeah.
It's had many devastating consequences for Jews in Israel, as that kind of creation. And basically what the KGB was trying to do was, kick the US and its ally Israel. This was a part of the Cold War. We also know that that Hitler and the Jerusalem Mufti were very much aligned as well. There's a long history there. And what happened is that shortly after that creation of the PLO, with thanks to the Soviets and the collaboration with Yasser Arafat, who was actually Egyptian, the UN, instead of being supportive to the Jewish state as had been for a long time, it suddenly, from the influence of the Soviets and the new growing Islamist bloc in the UN, including the PLO, etc., they just suddenly passed a resolution saying Zionism is racism, which is not true. But that caught on, as we know, that if anti-Semitism is not sorted, it will grow. And basically, that anti-Semitism in the UN grew from that. These regimes that run the UN were strengthened in many ways, including foreign aid money that comes from the West, as we've discussed, which only increases anti-Semitism in the UN, as we've seen, and impoverishes the West further, making us vulnerable to really fascist socialist forces that we see these days, including that dimwit MP calling for a massacre in this country. So it's all interlinked, all historically documented, and deeply, deeply worrying where we're headed with this. I'm not very optimistic.
No, I hear you. And when we look at people like Bataillon and their writing and warning about dimitude and the dimitude of Europe, and then they have been talking about the way that the European Union and the political elite have then aligned with Arab states for a
The EU is notorious for this. I wrote about this several years ago. They circumvented any sanctions on Iran to create a deal between the EU and Iran. The EU is systemically anti-Semitic. I was delighted when we left the EU for many, many reasons, including that, well, we haven't really implemented Brexit properly, have we? Thanks to lunatic, demoted politicians. But nothing surprises me with the EU. It is a terrible, another supranational organization like the United Nations, unaccountable for its really destructive policies and behavior.
I mean, I'm saying these things because we are trying to educate. When we have the privilege of people listening to us speak and what we write, we're trying to educate, because what has then fascinated me as well is this whole thing of France involved with Algeria and literally overnight going, we're now out of here. And the way that has then given a signal to the other Arab states, this whole thing of saying, well, Israel is another colonialist power as well, so they need to go. We need to get this out. They need to get out of here. We look at how they get their opinions by observing things.
And I think very much what people don't realize is that this war on Israel via Iran and its rest of its useful idiots in the West, for Iran, it's really the fact that Israel is a Jewish state and has a temerity to exist. And it is a theological war, basically, an ideological war. Israel can give as much land as it wants, give us up as much land as it wants. Iran and its rest of its Jew-hating alliances in the Middle East and in Africa and South Africa and in Western countries, it will never be enough, because Iran's reason for destroying Israel is because it's the Jewish state, and how dare Jews exist in the Middle East. It is part of their jihad against Jews. It is, if they can get Israel out the way as well, it will allow them to establish a caliphate in the entire Middle East. It is also part of their war with Saudi Arabia. They want to conquer Saudi Arabia as well, another heinous regime. But anyway, that's another thing to talk about another time. Yemen is another issue with it. There's a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. If we think things are bad in the Middle East, wait till Iran, God forbid, conquers Israel through its proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, etc. It would be even worse of a horror show. And that is the whole thing. That is why Iran is trying to get rid of Israel. It's Jewish. It's a Jewish state. How dare Jews exist? They want, we're an anathema to Iran and the rest of the Islamists. And it is was a strong nation state, and the only democracy in the Middle East, and a impediment to Iran's plans to establish a global caliphate.
So what, in regard, we're just in the last few minutes of an amazing conversation, and I'm very grateful to you for it. What we've seen the division within Israel right up till October the 6th, politically, a year and a half before that, in regard to the disagreements over reforming the Supreme Court.
Yes, I've written about that.
Yeah. And within Israel, again, you've got the same thing. And you raised this off camera. You've got the same fight again between what we perceive as the left and perceive as the right. And I think whether it's one organization, where organizations have been a particular group of people that have been out there to actually get rid of an Israeli elected government. Whatever people think, I'll just put that there. What are your thoughts on that? Because suddenly, and Caroline Glick, which I do observe avidly, has wonderfully reported on this, where there are Israeli troops who have been given a rest from Gaza and other action, who were then put a tent outside the Knesset saying, will you let us win this war? Will you give us all that we need to win this war? And I just, on the last couple of minutes, I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Israel's got the same issues as the US and the UK, with their own lefty woke tyrants that also dominate institutions and establishments there. For example, I wrote a piece last year for TCW saying Netanyahu's big mistake was caving into the covert cult. in that I mentioned the whole Supreme Court battle, the dominance of lefty woke tyranny politics in Israel. Israel's no real different to the US and Britain, where the establishment is beset with issues from the left and woke tyrants. Don't forget as well that Israel has, within the Knesset, there's a lot of political differences. It's hard to get things done. Israel has one election after that. There's a lot of political drama in Israel. But that's what happens in a democracy. And it is difficult because there is that lefty bloc in Israel dominating things, the woke tyrants, so to speak, like they dominate here. And also, it is difficult for Israel in terms that it's not just a war being fought on one front, but on three fronts. I've documented this in TCW, the infringement of Iran into the West Bank, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad alliance done there, Hezbollah on the northern borders with Syria and Lebanon, firing rockets into Israel at the moment, as well as the war in Gaza. So there is this issue there. The economy there is taken a dive because of the war. So there are many strands that are preventing Israel from doing what it needs to do, including that also, as we have here in the West, a bit of woke lefty nonsense. So it is not as uncomplicated as people think. There's a lot of complications, a lot of strands, and a lot of infighting that they have there.
And I would also like to say that there are Arabs that serve in the Knesset.
Oh my goodness, the Arabs, Israel has Arabs in the judiciary. There's no apartheid in Israel. I mean, this is something they've been writing on for years, as other writers have too, that the apartheid does not exist in Israel. I know apartheid. I grew up under the system of apartheid. I know what it means. I know what it looks like. It does not happen in Israel. There's legislation. It's illegal to discriminate against somebody because of their race, religion, gender, sexual preferences, etc. It is written, equality for all races, genders, sexes, etc. is written in the law in Israel. Do people not understand that this is why gay Palestinians and Christian Palestinians flee the West Bank and Gaza with the sanctuary of Israel? I mean, it's just quite extraordinary, but people prefer to believe propaganda. They like to believe the best of Hamas and the worst of Israel, aka the worst of us Jews. And that is deeply worrying.
Well, because it's going to challenge people, and the fact that they're going to have to take a position and they're going to have to do something about it, because it's coming, it's at their door.
They need to pick the right side, because if they're not taking a position, I'm going to remain neutral. No, by not taking a side, not taking the right side, you are not being neutral, but you're siding with the enemies of the West, the enemies of what is good in this world.
No, I hear you. Karen, I just want to thank you so much for joining me. Can you please inform everyone where they can find you and find your work, please?
I'm on Twitter, Karen H777. Have a look at TCW, The Conservative Women. You will find me under the list of writers there. And that's it. I'm not like a huge, big thing on social media. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I do document my work on social media, so on Twitter mainly. So it's it. Thank you very much for having me on, Mark.
Not at all. Not at all. As I say to you, your voice and your work are really important.
Thank you.
And I thank you for what you do. Well, I'm just going to play us out and just say thank you, Karen, again. I'm just going to play us out. Please, people, share this, click like, share it, as I'm trying to grow things and bring information and inform people and have a good debate and have a good discourse within the realms of good manners of being polite to each other, because I think it's really important. But thank you for joining me, and I'll play us out and we will be back very soon. Thank you.